Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the Chairing Conferences one of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. I love going along to events and I'm honoured to be asked to chair at some of these. At the Learning Technologies Conference in April, I was asked, as I regularly am, what's it like chairing? So, we obviously chose this as a topic and invited three awesome guests with diverse experience of chairing to tell you. Our first guest is Sarah Clayton-Jones. Sarah is the founder and CEO of Read to Lead, delivering book-inspired peer learning experiences that develop human-skilled leaders, connected teams, and curious workplace cultures. With over 20 years' experience leading and developing teams at global organisations, including Volkswagen and Accenture, Sarah blends sharp commercial insight with a people-centred approach to create agile, high-performing, and engaged leaders at every level. Our second guest is Sheena Whyatt. Sheena is an award-winning trainer, business coach, speaker, and founder of KAPOW Business Coaching with Impact. With over 24 years in learning and development, she has spent the past decade working with the Learning Technologies Conference, serving as chair's captain for the last 3 years. Sheena does a phenomenal amount of work to make Learning Technologies run, and we really do appreciate what she does. Sheena helps small business owners grow with clarity and confidence, replacing overwhelm with practical action. She has been shortlisted for multiple business awards in 2025 and is known for her warm humour and no-nonsense support. Our final guest is Claire Doody. Claire is a change leadership expert with over 20 years of global experience in learning and organisational development. She led transformation at Twitter and has held senior roles across sectors from tech to education. She now runs Work in Motion, a learning and advisory practice that offers a pragmatic, human-centred approach to leading change. Claire is a certified integral facilitator, polarity practitioner, and transformational coach. She regularly chairs at Learning Technologies and is a trusted guide to those shaping the future of work. Recorded in July 2025, this is a really engaging conversation, so settle back and enjoy. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Sarah, Sheena, and Claire talking about chairing conferences.
Well, then I'll start with, I think, probably a really simple question, which is, why do you chair? So, I've been involved both in chairing and in helping people chair. So I'm just really interested between both Claire and Sarah. Why do you chair? What is it about the chairing role that appeals to you?
Will I go first? Do you want to go first,
Go
Claire?
on.
Yeah, sure. So I chair Impact Learning Technologies and I've chaired at other conferences. And I will say with Learning Technologies, what I love about chairing is actually the community aspect. It's being part of the team. It's going over and back, especially as somebody who's self-employed and seeing the same people. And it's just a great way to stay attuned with what's happening in the space, because you actually have to do a bit of work to be a chair. You have to prepare, you have to meet the speakers, you have to think about shaping the session. So it kind of forces me to keep up with things as well.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Claire. I think, and I'm fairly new to chairing. It's the first year I did learning technologies, and as always with anything, right? It's the thing that you go away with that has the lasting impact, the leave behind, if you like, is the relationships and the friendships that you make. And like we said, didn't
Yeah.
we, just before coming on, that this is like a bit of a reunion. It's lovely to see people. So it is, for me, always about the people and the experience that you gain together and how enriching that is. And for me as well, it's the learning. And I was very fortunate to work with Stefan on Curiosity, which is an area that I'm super interested in. So it was like getting behind the scenes and in the nuts and bolts of it. And you learn so much, don't you, from going through that process, because you really are getting under the skin of it. And then I think the third bit for me would probably be because I'm so interested in leadership and how we lead ourselves and others in those situations. I really think that chairing is a leadership role, and I think it's underrated, that role of you're not just running the session to make sure it goes smoothly, that obviously that people have space to think. It's an act of leadership. It's making sure everything comes together, that you're shaping the tone and the environment for people to learn, to have a conversation, to to make sure that different people have an opportunity to ask questions, and that you create a dialogue around it. And I think that is all leadership skills. So I think it is underrated, would be my thought.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that both of you mentioned that whole piece around sharing, which is there's a whole lot more to it than people think there is. And I think that is actually one of the biggest misperceptions of what sharing is. There is this assumption that you just sort of turn up and go and do your, great stage introduction piece, isn't it? It's your WWW moment, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. But it is so much more than that. And why do you think? I'm really interested. Why do you both think it is that there is that misperception that all we actually do as chairs is just sort of rock up on the day and go, hello, everybody, here's a speaker, whereas there is all that work, as you both have said, that goes underneath that point, and yet that's all people think we do.
I think because we're just so good at it, Sheena, it looks effortless.
And it's got to be based on something as well. I guess historically, maybe it was more like, oh, can you just introduce? Can you just make sure that this person's in the right place at the right time? And as it's evolved,
Yep.
I don't know, from a learning technologist, I've not been involved that long, but I think, the expectation of an experience, the standard of presenting is only got higher. And it's not just, you have to design that more. It takes a lot more intention, doesn't it,
Yeah.
than just rocking up. People don't just want to be talked out. You have to engage people, otherwise. So therefore, you doing that on your own is really hard as a speaker, to run a session, and interactive, engaging, to kind of tickle all those boxes to really leave an imprint. So I think the role therefore has had to change, and I think it's got more complex. But with any of these things, they have carry-ons, don't they?
I also think that people forget that a lot of the speakers at conferences are not, they're not professional speakers. They're practitioners, professionals. They're not used to standing up in front of an audience. And it's fantastic that conferences like Learning Technologies showcase practitioners. And they're also taking a big risk because they're putting on a big show, right? So I feel the chair's role is sort of this interface, or this really important person that kind of lifts up the speakers, and also makes sure that the audience is getting a good experience. Whereas I think a lot of people assume they show up at a conference and the speakers are seasoned speakers, and there's no risk attached from the conference point of view, and maybe that's why they think chairs just rock up. I mean, Sheena, when I spoke, you were my chair, and I learned from you, and you are our chair's captain. So you probably have a lot more insight into what happens across the board. But so I'm really curious, actually, to hear what your impression is on this topic.
Put me on the spot, why don't you? I think that comment actually about the fact that people assume that the speaker who is delivering has got all of that experience is a really big ingredient, if you like, as to why people think chairs just turn up and go, hello, everybody, and goodbye. And there is actually a huge piece behind the scenes before we even get going with learning technologies, that in this specific instance, which is, who do we think is going to be the right chair for this speaker? Because most particularly, if your speaker is inexperienced, or that inexperience doesn't necessarily have to be an inexperience in public speaking. It can simply be the inexperience of speaking to our audience, and in a way that is inclusive and interactive, and that is not sit down and suffer death by PowerPoint for 45 minutes whilst I talk at you. And it's helping them maneuver that space from, when we tell you that you've got this time to speak, we're not saying you speak for 60 minutes without stopping, and then you get 10 minutes Q&A, which is also part of how much it has evolved since I started 14 years ago as a chair. When, Sarah, you're right, initially it was, we're looking for people to facilitate sessions, but there was much less involvement than there is now, which I think is a huge reflection of not just the expectation from the audience, who don't want sit and sponge. They don't want sit here for an hour and be talked at. They want to feel part of that space. They want to feel part of not necessarily the learning activity, but they want to feel immersed in that session. So the role of the chair has had to change hugely. And, the role of the chair has then had to become everything from, let me help you make your content attractive to this audience, to let me stop you taking over, depending on, on who you've got. So it's been a massive change, which starts very early with who is the right chair for this session. And I think if more people knew that misperception, because it is what it is, that misperception that all we do is turn up and do a quick ball change tap dance routine and then get off again is something that'd be quite interesting for them to see.
I think it's a really important point you raised, Sheena, and I think it's facilitated learning. We're facilitating learning, and I think the shift has been, probably what you've described there a little bit is shifting from what we learn, so hearing a presentation, absorbing it, death by PowerPoint, to how we learn, knowing that how people learn through, like you said, more engaging. It's more participatory. That is than it is performance, isn't it now? And I think so. Therefore, it has to be designed. There's so much design that goes into it. I think people underestimate probably. It isn't. You don't. Yeah, like you said, don't rock up and do a tap dance. It's not. It's not just something that happens. It's very designed and curated.
The other challenge that I think is that, in terms of whether it's a perception challenge or just the reality of being in the role, is around there's a real balance. There's a line between a support function, where you're offering very practical help to the speaker or speakers, and a much more facilitative, active role without taking over. So I think it's a very shapeless role. I think it's not well defined or boundaried, and I think it necessarily needs to be that, because I've chaired 3 strangers who've shared a slot, and that puts a huge amount of control in my hands in a way, because I'm the unifying force as the chair. I've also chaired one speaker who's an absolute expert, and all they need is a very light touch. You hit on this earlier, Sheena, some connective tissue between their subject matter and their field and the audience, because they don't know the audience. And those people don't need to be heavily managed, and they don't need to be, they're pretty good at what they do. And you need to sort of step aside from your ego and kind of go, well, I'm here, and, I have to justify my presence. Actually, it's okay to be in a more background role sometimes. And at other times, you really have to step forward. So it's a little bit boundaryless, I think, the role. And I think that means people have different understandings based on their different
And I
experiences.
think what also gets interesting is the personality of the speaker can have a huge impact on how you chair. And having the confidence, having these skills as a chair to look at your speakers and think, am I dealing with somebody who has got masses of knowledge but needs some help to make that knowledge transferable to a stage, to an audience? Sometimes you have to almost give them a little bit of public speaking tutoring, almost, but it's also when you're then faced as a chair with the speaker who is so confident in their material and they're so confident in their ability to deliver, that sometimes they almost create this little barrier, if you like, of, I'm the expert, you're the chair, you get back in your box. And there is that moment of going, actually, without me here as a chair, your session then becomes all about you. And my job as the chair is to make sure that your session is about presenting you and your amazing amount of knowledge, expertise, blah, 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 in a way that's not going to alienate this audience. And sometimes that level of skill is quite interesting. And I'm, as I'm sitting here talking to both of you now, it's really interesting to me, the different layers of skill that a competent, and that is not quite the right word, but a competent chair needs to be able to be put in front of that situation. Because talking about learning technologies, which connects the 3 of us, it is very rare for a chair to chair the same person or the same people twice. Very rare. because not only do we not often have repeat speakers, we do have people who come back every 2 or 3 years, but it is rare that that chair is paired up with the same person more than once. So you are having to put all, if you like, of your skill set into high alert in those first couple of conversations to work out, is this person willing to be chaired? Am I going to have to put some charm and sparkle on whilst wanting to smack them around the head in the background to get them to understand that I am not just that turn up and introduce person, that actually I am here to help them. And sometimes we have that barrier to cross, I feel. What do you think? Have you experienced that, Claire? Sarah, I know this was your first time at learning tech, but have you experienced that elsewhere?
Sorry, can you clarify the question again, Sheena?
It's that sometimes there can be the barrier to get across very early, which is almost convincing your speaker that they need you as a chair, because they have that misconception that actually all you're going to do is jazz hands and get them on the stage and get them off the stage. And sometimes it can be it's not necessarily the inexperienced speaker, it's the very experienced speaker who doesn't think they need you. And you have to cross that barrier quite early. I mean, I've certainly found that in the 14 years that I've chaired.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting one because I think it links to what you were saying earlier about confidence as well. And I went off on a thought process there around confidence and the role of confidence in that, because it was kind of building on what you were saying, Claire, about removing your ego. You have to remove your ego, and ego is different to confidence, right? But you also have to bring forward your confidence to, it's not challenge, but to cajole or to shape, a little bit what you were describing there around, having a role and finding your role together. And I guess how I approached it, which is how I approach everything, is with curiosity. So if I don't feel confident, I'm just curious. You just ask questions, and then when you ask questions, they'll work it out themselves, or they'll find it useful or not, and then your role shapes from there, and it just shows interest. I think if you just show interest, a lot of people that you're interested in the content, the material, it kind of grows from there. And that was my experience. But then, like I said, I was very fortunate that I worked with a guy that was all about curiosity. But I'm interested, and maybe we'll come back to that. So Claire, if you want to say anything on it, but I'm interested in the role of confidence, and whether that's how much of that comes into play as a chairing role, and whether there's a barrier there in people putting themselves forward. Anyway, Claire, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with confidence. I would say and I feel learning technologies, Sheena and Dawn do a beautiful job of preparing us. And I get out that slide deck, and it says the role of the chair is to, and it's very clear. And I in my first meeting with my speaker, I say my job is to make sure that you have a great experience as a speaker, and that the audience has a great experience in the audience. And I'm a seasoned facilitator, so I do pull that
Yeah.
card. But I kind of said I do, and it does come from a place of confidence to say my job is. So I take up my space in that very first interaction, so that it's not left to them to guess what my job is. And if I happen to be the person who's communicating back to the conference organizers on their behalf, I'm not their PA either, So it's I feel if I assert that role in the very early stages, and I don't do it in an arrogant way. It's just a statement of fact that I have a job here. I say I've chaired for several years. I set out my without just over justifying, but I definitely claim my space in the first
Whereas I guess I
interaction.
was going it more and earning my space, which is interesting, probably because you're an experienced chair and I'm not. Although I do a lot of chairing and facilitating, I hadn't done it at Learning Technology, so a little bit of imposter crept in there. I was like, what's my role? So I guess in some ways I was through proving it, if you like. Well, what are you trying to get them to get out of that? How might somebody feel about that? How could you involve them in that? What's the takeaway for them? And then through that, we developed a rapport that then there's mutual respect. And then you just sort of came from there. And then maybe this time I would be a bit more assertive about that, around the value that you bring. It's interesting, isn't it? Different, I guess.
Mm. I just find it's easy. It's nice to get it out of the way in the introduction. This is the job, and it's been bestowed upon me by somebody else. So I'm just doing my
I
job,
think it's
you
also
know.
important that there is that piece there that people are chosen. That's something I get quite sort of worked up about, if you like, at the beginning of setting people up and getting people ready to chair for Learning Technologies Live. Is, this isn't a case of Don in this is, sits there with a bag full of names and dips his hand in and goes, oh, they'll do. And, there's a lot of thought that sits behind
Mm.
how are we going to pair this up to create a great experience? And the thing is, what I think is quite interesting, the three of us here right now are talking about the great experience for our audience, absolutely. But it's also my job to make sure it's a great experience for our chairs, because there needs to be that moment of thinking, goodo, the ship is ready to go. And as you know, as part of the briefing, we always talk about the fact that you are the captain of your ship. And yes, absolutely, the good ship learning technology session in that context, excuse me, has to be something that you can set sail and feel it's going to be okay. But so much of that is thinking, if the role was just turn up, introduce your speaker, get off stage and wait for the 70 minutes to be over, then how many people would actually come back to chair time and time again? Where's the joy in the just hello and goodbye piece? There isn't. There is no joy.
Yeah.
Anybody could do that. And frankly, you could have one person doing that for every session. They'd be running around like headless chicken, but you could do it. I think that another part of the big misperception that I see about chairs is, first of all, they are chosen. There's probably a T-shirt in the making there, isn't there? Chairs are chosen or something. Anyway, is they are chosen for merchandise. Let's go for it. But it's thinking, actually recognize that there is. I had a really interesting conversation with a speaker a couple of years ago who was kind of making out the whole, but you're not good enough to be on stage and speak if you're a chair. That is so wrong. That is so 100% the wrong way to look at it. Because if you want the ego piece and you're chasing the ego piece, by all means, get on stage and do your thing. But it takes a whole bunch more than that to have the skill to go, I am effectively what the audience are going to see is the jazz hands tap dance intro and exit. That's what they're going to see. But what they don't see is the fact that my ego takes a backseat because I'm here to make you look good.
And I think that, the point, just to pull out 2 points that which builds on a little bit what Claire's saying, I think absolutely the success of it came, in my experience, came down to that clarity of purpose. We're here for a great experience for you and for the audience. Like, the audience must go away with that learning, that experience. And then it's also the support that you, Sheena, provided the chair. So you always felt supported and enabled and empowered, all that jazz, all that one. And it makes a massive difference to the success of it. But the other bit that you're also saying, which I think is really interesting, is the design of the learning experience, the design of the experience we want people to have comes back to the people. And I think that chemistry that people have on stage or not, people feel it interrupts or has an effect on that experience, doesn't it? And I think that rapport, you can tell when people have had that rapport, that interaction, they facilitate in a way that is blended together, they've worked together, it's a whole better result as a result of that. So I can see the thought that goes into designing who goes with who, 100%, and I think that's incredibly valuable. So just something I'm interested in asking you both is, how do you feel the experience may change or is changing and evolving, maybe going into 2026? Like, we're clear on our purpose, we kind of know the skills, the things we need to do, but how is that experience that we want to create for people changing, do you feel? Or that maybe Don wants to encourage as an experience at Learning Technologies?
Well, I personally would love to see more audience participation
Mhm.
type sessions, more facilitated experiences that are less oriented around speakers or experts, and kind of recognizing that there's a load of expertise in the audience and in the room, and that people can learn a lot from a dialogue, from a conversation. So
Yeah.
if I had a wish list in terms of how we could mix things up a little bit. I think peer dialogue is very powerful. And I always try to bring an element of it into the sessions that I chair. But yeah, I'd love to see more of that. That would be on my Dear Santa list for
Dear
2026.
John, brackets.
Dear John. But yes, yeah.
Exactly. I think something that I saw started to happen this year that I think will become more of a challenge for chairs next year was several speakers wanting it's the buzzword, wasn't it? They wanted completely asynchronous process. They didn't want conversation. They didn't want any face-to-face. They wanted all of the preparation for their session, which when you think about what we've talked about so far this morning, they wanted all of that to simply happen by email because they were far too busy to actually have a conversation. And that is going to be a real challenge for chairs going forward. There were several speakers who did that this year. And the reaction from chairs, it comes back to your comment about community from earlier, was great because there were a few of our chairs who were absolutely discombobulated with that in the whole, well, wait a minute, I'm wired to have conversations with these people to make sure that I'm doing my job, as you were saying, and to have that, well, I don't want you to do it that way because I don't want to speak to you. I only want to do this through email, was quite a challenge. And I can see that there may need to be that little bit extra community support, that little bit extra thought behind the scenes for, how do we help new chairs particularly deal with that change in behavior from speakers. I think that could be an interesting technical skill area to look at, as we move into LT26.
And is that to be challenged though? Because does that indicate potentially in like a congruence between what we're trying to create, which is conversation experiences for the audience? It starts with conversations with your chair, doesn't it? To kind of then create, otherwise you can't create and design that, co-create and design it and facilitate it in that room. It just won't happen.
Or maybe we need to think about what is the objective of the meetings. And I think a very big objective of it is the rapport and the chemistry between the chair and the speaker. So perhaps it's producing sort of a set of recommendations of, maybe there's some voice memos, like asynchronous video call where you introduce yourself, like that if a meeting isn't available, that there's some kind of, whatever the goals of those meetings are, you can accomplish them asynchronously in a best practice sort of way.
There's an interesting educating piece in there as well. We've spoken on and off throughout our time so far together this morning about the misconception of the role of the chair and how all three of us are, very aware of challenging that. And I think on the flip side of that is there is also a misconception by the speaker of their role in this particular context, I'm just going to turn up and do it. And thinking, well, hang on. That then is the other side of the chairing coin is, I have certainly had the experience in the 14 years of introducing my speaker, having gone through this process, and they effectively then delivered something completely different to what we had planned and put together to appeal to the audience, and it flopped, and it was horrible. It was the worst 70 minutes of my life in that context because there was nothing I could do at that stage. They had completely ignored everything and they'd done it their way. And what was interesting, and I think what is great about the chairing community is I, of course, come out of that bit shell-shocked, and a bit kind of what the insert expletive just happened. But to be able to feed it back into the chairs community and also to feed it back into the bigger organizational picture and say, we need to put some processes in place here to stop this happening, which is why we do much more now in the whole, this is how you chair and this is what you need to do. And those whole pieces where we say, if it doesn't feel right, tell us quickly because you are right. If your gut feeling as the chair is going, this is all going horribly wrong, then, let us know. We can step in. The great phrase, is it time to deploy Don? If you're asking that question, it's way past time to deploy Don. Scramble Sheena first and then bring out the big guns. But it's so much of chairing is all about that, is that gut feeling. Is it right? Does it feel right? And I think that's, one of the things when people talk to me and say, how can I be a chair? At the end of every learning technologies, there's a little queue of people who are going, I want to do this. I want to be a chair, which is great because that makes me think, do you know what? As a team, which is what we are, we have obviously done a great jog that I've then got people going, I want to do this. I want to be a chair.
Mm.
And I think that there are a couple of things around that. If it's something that people want to do, then put your hand up and volunteer, and just give that whole thing of, let me be a person who can come and create this space for somebody else to thrive. And so that the audience will sit back at the end of that session and go, what the heck, that was good. I really enjoyed that, and they're buzzing about it as they come out of it. I think the more we talk about what the role of the chair actually is, the more we will get people going, I want a bit of that,
Yeah.
rather than do I really just want to do the jazz hands? And it's like, that's not what it's about. It isn't about the jazz hands. It's about this bigger picture. And the more we talk about that, I think the more we'll find people will come forward and say, yeah, you know what? I could be a speaker, but I could be a chair and I'd rather do that.
Yeah, and I go back, I think, great point. I go back to what I said and why I did it. Well, one was the community. So yeah, you're part of a club, it's great, you feel good, people want to be involved. The other bit is you learn so much, don't you? So your own learning about how to facilitate conversations or connections and the industry. So it's a great learning opportunity. But finally, it's flexing your leadership skills. You said there's so many diverse skills you need to have to do that role. So I think it's a very attractive proposition for people to want to do that.
I also think, like, selfishly, there's great brand alignment. Like, I always get a lift as someone who's self-employed. I always get a lift in kind of engagement on social media when I participate in learning technologies, and it's nice to have the association with the event and to be chosen. To Sheena's earlier point, like, it's nice to say, oh yeah, I know the crew at Learning Technologies. I'm invited to chair there, so there's lots of good reasons to get involved. And I think sometimes people feel it's a closed shop. And I've been asked, how did you become a chair? And honestly, I had I just left Twitter? I think I had just left Twitter. I was in touch with Don, and it was COVID. And I said, if there's any way I can help or volunteer, let me know. And he said, we're full up. And then he came back and he said, actually, someone's dropped out. Can you come short notice? I said, yeah, I'm there. So it was purely opportunistic. And if you don't ask, you won't
And I
find
think
out.
that is a key. People don't ask. I think it's a lot more to it. And I think you raise a really important point that from a personal perspective, the impact on your personal brand, the visibility that you get from that is so valuable. Yeah, so valuable.
I was really heartened actually this year to see there was so much more conversation on social media, particularly after the event, from our chairs about the fact that they chaired the sessions, and thinking, yes, if you're going to, Claire and I both self-employed, if you're going to give your time to go and support the event, you want to be able to get as much out of that as you can. So it is an opportunity, but it's also making the most of that opportunity. And it was fabulous to see that wave of, here I am chairing my session. I love that. My session, thinking, yes, there you go. That's what we need is, more, because the more that happens, it isn't just about getting more people to volunteer or want to be chairs. It's actually also about look at the people who are involved in this. It isn't just a faceless organization that's putting the event together. What chairing does, I feel, particularly in the context of learning technologies, is it is a huge part of the experience, because what we do as a team of chairs is help create the conference experience. We don't get involved in who speaks when and on which stage and on which day. That part is done by a far bigger and more capable team, if you like, that way. But what we do is create that experience. We work together. A lot of people don't see that either. That there is that big team element going on in the background, people helping each other, people supporting each other, which means when you get there for that just 2 days delivery, the team are on it like a car bonnet, which is what people see. And that is so great for your brand because, it makes you look good. And who doesn't want that?
Okay, closing point for me would be it really is about the learning experience, what the audience want. And that's what, as a chair, we focus on. It's not about what the chair wants, what the speaker wants. And I think more facilitated experiences, what Claire said, conversations, peer dialogue, if we can build that in more, that would be super interesting to create a more immersive, more interactive. And the second point for me would be make sure we really drive home after each of the presentations and for the speakers around what's applicable here, what can we take forward, what do people use here, because otherwise sometimes you're left with that's great theory, but what do I do with it? And I think making sure that there's always takeaways that people can apply in their real lives day to day would be two key points. Go on, Claire.
I would say my top tips for anyone who's chairing would, or whether in this context or another one, is, it's a dance between holding other people to account. So there's an accountability piece and making them feel cared for. And I think it's a really skillful role to do that. And I think you have to take responsibility for setting the boundaries out very clearly and sometimes repeatedly, so that you get what you want out of it.
Kind
as well.
accountability, isn't it?
Yep. And I think if I was to tie that in together, is it's your session. We say that every year, you are the captain of your ship, and you have the ability to make it whatever you want it to be within reason. And, all the things that we want more of, we have the opportunity to create that. It's taking that confidence forward into chairing, not just at Learning Technologies, but positioning yourself as that facilitator, that motivator, that creator of a great space that's not just for your speaker, but it's also for your audience. And that is a skill we should all be shouting more about, in my view.
Love it. Own it. Create it. Love it.
Well, it's been so lovely speaking to you, Sarah and Sheena. I've really enjoyed the chat. I'm getting very nostalgic and excited for 2026.
Me too.
So.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It's lovely. Like I said, a bit of a reunion over my morning cup of tea. Lovely chat as always, and some great takeaways and thoughts there. Excited for 2026. Sheena, bring it on. We must already be planning, right?
Absolutely. I get the feeling there could be a midterm chairs community reunion thing coming up in the two, but it will come around sooner than you think. It's been lovely to see both. And yes, it does feel like a reunion. Isn't it lovely not to be doing it in the tiniest, busiest speaker lounge ever?
That's so true.
Amen.
We thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and we were incredibly lucky to have Sarah, Sheena and Claire sharing their approaches to chairing at conferences, as well as such great advice, hints and tips. When you see people chairing, remember the work they've done to make the event run well and the sessions pop. With the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum happening in October, bear this podcast in mind. A massive thank you to them for their time, and you'll find all their details as always, along with links to the subjects that they spoke about in the show notes. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, and next time it's a special two-part episode, the L&D Books one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.